right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Reactionary Opinions. This is probably the episode of the year. We have a guest on board, guest on the show. We have the one and only Roman Cabanac from the Renegade Report, renowned, famous Twitter troll and all-round shit stirrer, which is great. How are you doing there, Roman?
I am excellent, thank you. Well, I used to be a troll. I'm less now because Twitter is actually a bit boring. The problem with Twitter is everyone who used to react to me blocked me. So now I don't get those retweets for trolling, I do it less.
There's no lulls to be had. That's unfortunate.
Well, far few people are more attuned to trolling than before. So I need to up my level quite a lot. Or I can just do stuff that makes money for me. So I'd rather pick money.
It's a hard choice, that. That's actually how Russell found you, was on Twitter as a, blocked by Pierre de Force.
I still
I remember that. Yeah, probably still are, but that's how I remember when I was getting into Twitter a good few years ago. I think I started following you on Twitter back 2012 already, strangely enough. I haven't been on Twitter in years, but when I was on Twitter, I think back in 2011, 2012, I followed you. And then when I caught up again a couple of years later, I saw now Roman has been blocked by Pierre de Force.
Yeah, well, I produce Helen Zill's podcast, Tea with Helen, and on the first 3 episodes, it was 3 journalists, and they all blocked me on Twitter, but I met them in real life. So I made it super awkward for them.
Yes, that's quite a paradox.
It is quite something. But thankfully, after they were on the show, it's actually a blessing to be blessed by people with, a remarkably low intellect. But anyway, thank you for the invitation to this fine show. Well, I hope it's a fine show. I hope I don't bring it down.
Yeah, we hope so too. Anyway, this is actually I think maybe Roman planned this. Maybe this is actually the video where he's actually going to come out as he's going to disown his anarchy crap and actually come out as a reaction. Am I right?
I'm here an authoritarian. Get used to it, people.
No. I'm still very much an anarchist, but I've read a lot of neo-reactionary stuff in the past year or two, and it's perfectly consistent with my philosophy. Perfectly consistent. I don't need a state, right? You chaps maybe need a state. I'll just think of community and governance doesn't need states to exist. So I can still be an anarchist while accepting neo-reactionary at the same time, if that makes sense.
We don't really like the word neo-reactionary. We're Christian reactionaries. We're the good reactionaries. The real reactionaries. There is only one kind of reactionary that you can get, and that's a Christian reactionary.
So is this before Vatican II?
That's those guys. I'm not affiliated. I'm Orthodox.
Yeah, Dylan's in a league of his own.
I'm a Putin stooge.
Yeah.
Oh, just like your president as well.
Yes. Yes. We're cut from the same cloth.
What do you mean? What do you mean by Christian reactionary? So, what is your worldview? What is the moral imperative in a world that you would like?
Dylan, you want to take that?
So, this kind of gets up to the metaphysical angle. So, I can only really speak for myself, but I would imagine we'd all agree that all, value claims, judgments, they have to stem from somewhere higher, or they're just sort of arbitrarily made up, in which case, why should I follow one's, value judgments as opposed to my own? So basically it all sort of stems from theism. So that sort of enlightens the worldview. So I think we'd all agree that all political philosophies or ideas about how the world should be are typically not self-evident. They usually stem from somewhere else. They kind of have to. And so ours is just more of a theistic basis, and that sort of enlightens sort of how we see the world.
All right. And if I had to look at the type of philosophers you read to get this worldview, who would I look for?
Well, in my case, mostly a lot of Orthodox material. So John of Damascus, he wrote a compendium which sort of summed up the Orthodox faith. Gregory of Nyssa, and some of the critiques that you're like what you're talking about, neo-reactionary circles and stuff, or even paleoconservative. So it's basically, the way I see it is the right today, and I think we kind of all agree to this definition, is sort of based on hierarchy and inequality, and accepting those as facts of life, basically. And within that scheme, you have a lot of different competing ideas. And I think a lot of different people across the spectrum have various critiques of the system as it now exists and valuable insights into humans. So there's no one person, I would say, who has like, that's exactly the system I want to see. But it's more of a, you have this sort of core idea, worldview, and then you sort of, using that, try to find the best system to achieve what you see as the good.
Yeah. Quite. So that's
sorry,
quite
I can't
accurate
hear
for
you,
me.
Roman. Sorry, you're muted.
I think you muted. I think you muted yourself.
Oh, there you go. Am I back?
Yeah.
All right. No, I apologize. I'm supposed to be the guest, but I'm actually quite curious. So what would you like to see in the world of your ideology? Like, what sort of lives will people have, or what sort of behaviors or characteristics would you like people to have?
Easy there, Dylan. Easy there. Go slowly.
I'll just when you finished, I'll add just one word after that.
No, you go, Russell. You go.
I'll just as a counter to the world as it exists today, I want to see anti-egalitarianism. I think egalitarianism is destroying the fabric of humanity, and anything right now at this stage for me, I'm about to throw anything possibly, any sort of weight I've got behind an idea that's anti-egalitarian. If it can just stop this diabolical march to nihilism and self-destruction, which is the egalitarian sort of mindset, it just cannot sustain itself. And if I had to pick a line, and just drill that one thing, I would go anti-egalitarian, and by definition as well, that would also be hierarchical. So I strictly dismiss egalitarianism. Basically, I see the world as where a symphony of natural law, theocratic law, and what is actually evident as well. So a symphony of all those three, and also the pragmatic side as well. So a symphony of those three would be my I don't want to sound like an ideologue, but if I want to be an ideologue for the purposes of this discussion, that is what I would see things.
Yeah. If you don't, as I believe Franz Cronier said, if you don't get involved with ideology gets involved with you. So
it comes to you. You have to respond. There's no other way of getting around it.
Yeah. No, and I think basically what we're looking for is a kind of sort of traditionalist in the Christian worldview, moral values and stuff coming more to the fore in society. It's sort of a spiritual reawakening of kinds, and as Russell said, a explicitly right-wing, anti-egalitarian society. So, and that can take different forms, and I think that's the thing. We don't particularly have a system we would like to see imposed everywhere. We're not universalists in that regard. We recognize that different societies are going to have different needs, and maybe Maybe Chile needs a Pinochet. Maybe they could use a constitutional monarchy. Maybe they could have like a confederated republic of sorts. We're not a one size fits all type of outfit, I guess, in that regard.
Yeah, that's the pragmatic side of us coming in.
Yeah, no,
I think
I'm skeptical of universalists generally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but that's now. How would that, what you've heard there now, Roman? How would that tie in with anarchy or whatever your worldview is?
Well, anarchy is strictly anti-universalist, of course, because it's about self-governance, right? And self-governance means people have the responsibility to govern themselves, and the rules of the community are emergent. So the rules come from the bottom up, and it's based over time. It's based over with experience, and these sort of communities develop over decades, centuries, sometimes even millennia, until the state comes and then imposes a will from the top. And then it just says, we represent all the people, and we will impose all sorts of laws. And we'll try to be a sort of universalist moral framework for millions of different people. And I disagree with that. I think people should focus on working and living in communities that they accept, that reflects their views, and that will be anti-fragile. So basically that will last for a long time. And I'm not the one to decide what sort of communities will exist. I know which one I would like to exist in. But in South Africa, we have a state with 10, 12 nations. And we're all supposed to sort of work together under this very liberal framework.
Liberal-ish.
Yeah, sort of liberal-ish. I mean, rights to all sorts of things. But I don't see in the long term how that will work, because human beings are not, we don't normally like bind together. We bind together under economic growth, because if we're making money and we got jobs, we're quite busy, or through a shared value or shared culture or shared religion or things like that. If you don't have either one, society fragments, and I think that's what we're seeing now, especially in South Africa. So I'm sort of hopeful that full-on anarchy will exist, and there will be a variety of communities that exist, each having their own law, rules, religion, cultural values, and hopefully they can just trade with each other and not fight each other. But that's utopian, I know.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're actually quite, okay with anarchy and stuff. Me personally, I mean, I can't exactly speak for Russell and Dylan, but me personally, I don't really have a problem with anarchy, because it's exactly like you say. It'll start off with full anarchy, and then sort of communities will form, and eventually sort of societies will form and all that sort of thing around the communities and stuff. So, and those societies, at least in an anarchy, you have the freedom for those societies to form. So we could actually have a Christian conservative society within an anarchist environment. It can sort of form. So I don't know. I don't really have a problem with.
And you can have a Calvinist Afrikaans one. You can have a nationalist Zulu one. You can have a monarch Xhosa one. And I believe, between you and I think these sort of things, I think people will be happier living in those, in those communities in which they choose to live in. Weird.
Correct.
Weird, I know.
Oh, gosh. Are you talking about groupthink now, man? Roman, how can you talk about it? It's horrible.
But think about it in South Africa. We've actually experienced levels of anarchy before. If you look at the Great Track, that was anarchy, essentially. That's a form of. Am I correct, Roman? I mean, that's a form of anarchy. They governed themselves. They negotiated with people around them. They traded with people around them. They established what they needed to establish.
Absolutely. I mean, the history of South Africa is a complicated one, but essentially, when the Dutch arrived, I mean, there were people, the Khoi and the San were there. They traded with them. They married them. And the rest of the country was filled with Bantu tribes and a few others. But when fur trekkers moved up north to the Transvaal, they were going through uncharted territory, and they met people they fought with, they met people that they negotiated with, they've met people which they signed treaties with, they signed title deeds with, and these things exist. People do cooperate without a sort of state apparatus at hand, and that is the very essence of what anarchy is.
Yeah, the only difference, of course, is in those days we barely had 1 million people for the whole of South Africa. Now we've got almost 65, 70 million people. It's a little bit, the complications are still there, but fundamentally the idea that people can govern themselves still exists.
Oh, of course they can govern themselves. I mean, they do it every day.
Yeah.
I mean,
they do. But
there's no
what I'm saying is
telling me to come on your show, right? I choose.
Correct.
I take my daughter to school. I choose which school she goes to. I drive her there. I drive to work. I meet with clients that I chose. No one's forcing me to do all this. Every day we choose.
That's not exactly true, Roman. You know that I'd said that if you didn't come on the show, I would block you from Twitter. So, and you came on the show. So, Scott 1, Roman 0.
Yes, your threat of blocking, really forced me on here. No doubt. So, as I said from the beginning, I don't think my views of anarchy are incompatible with your Christian reactionary views at all.
No.
I don't know
Not
if I would
necessarily. I think it's just and this, I can only speak for myself here, but it's I guess it's a different idea about sort of outcomes, or plausibility, I guess. So until about not too long ago, I was an anarchist like you. I was a card carrying ANCAP. I had the T-shirt and everything, but eventually, and I guess, and this is why I don't rag on, that sort of not those. I have no truck with left libertarians, but that sort of Mises kind of more right-wingish libertarian, the one that sort of recognizes the general inequalities of society and the inevitability of hierarchy in some way. But I just, at a certain point, I just don't see it as sort of a sustainable ideology, and by no means inevitable. So a lot of people, I think, are kind of techno optimists in a certain degree. They think that technology will eventually be the way by which we're able to self-segregate into our own groups and kind of govern ourselves. And to a certain extent, that's true. But on the other hand, the tools that are available to us will also be available to the state. And not only that, but even if you did form, sort of private covenant communities of a certain kind, I just don't see how they don't inevitably devolve back into statism. Because the iron law of oligarchy is a real thing, and you're going to have elites in society. People will cede power, or will cede authority that they have to this elite. It happened time and again. I mean, that's the history of South Africa, right? I mean, we just had an example of the Voortrekkers, and they had their own deal. There was no formal state, and then things get a little dicey. They need to organize, and what do? They form governments and whatnot, because that's, for better or worse, that's just what people do. And there's also, again, the toxic culture element. So through mass media manipulation, things like the arts and whatnot, you can basically manipulate people to a certain extent into adopting certain ideas, and that's kind of what we're seeing play out right now. So good in theory, I just don't see the plausibility of it, and that's kind of why I guess sort of philosophically, to a certain degree, I am still an ANCAP, but it's I just got pessimistic, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not a utopian by any means. I have no idea what the end goal looks like, or what the end of the road looks like, if we did have a real anarchy and people self-organized. But what I do know is that actually I don't know anything. Basically, I just want people to self-organize first, and then we'll take it from there. But it is inevitable that power will exist, that hierarchies exist for a reason. You chaps are fans of hierarchies, and the people on the top of the hierarchies tend to really enjoy it up there, and will stymie the rise up the hierarchy in various ways, using what power they have. But that exists in every single structure that has humans in it. So it's not really something against anarchism as such. It's something against humankind, generally speaking. Those with power love it and will try to prevent others from receiving it.
Yeah, and the meet the old boss, same as the new boss sort of situation. And ultimately, I guess that's, what I realize is there is no end game. Life as it exists is just constant struggle, ascension, glory, decay, and then, sort of trying to rebuild. And then there's a new dispensation, and then that's going to change, and then it's going to get rigid and collapse due to decadence and all sorts of other issues. And it's just kind of how it goes. I mean, you may see little pockets of it.
Like Sir Elton John said, it's the circle of life.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not as sorry, carry on, Roman. You wanted to say something?
Well, just a general thing. Do you chaps, all three of you, believe in progress?
Not as such.
This is the whole thing. And what do you mean by progress?
Yeah.
No. Do people get better over time? Is there some sort of will society be better in 50 years than it was 50 years ago, or than it is today?
I don't believe it's a straight line, a linear line upwards. I think you are going to you're probably going to have it. I actually think it probably moves in cycles of 20 to 40 years at a time. You might be fortunate if you live to 80. Going forward in the next 80 years, you're probably going to have a quite short turning cycles. I don't see things just going perpetually better. I just don't. There's too much humanness in the equation.
The way I would explain it, Russell, is that the notion that everything leads to decay unless it's met with a opposing force.
Oh, correct. Yeah.
And so it's just never going to be a straight line. There's always going to be some sort of
generally
there's going to be sorry, carry on, Russell.
Generally as reactionaries, we believe that and I'm pretty sure I speak for the other two here as well, is that everything naturally is tending towards decay unless met with a equal or opposing stronger force to hold it up. So the natural order of things is towards decay, unless it's met with something that holds it up, or at least equal or greater force to hold it up. That's the mindset of us reactionaries in that, and I think that's one of our driving forces. We like the idea of being the idea of struggle, because struggle is that opposing force the whole time. If you just allow things to continue, they don't. They actually, I don't believe they sort themselves out. We're not of that opinion that things can sort themselves out.
Because I was under the impression. Sorry to interrupt quickly. I was under the impression that what really binds reactionaries together is the the opposition to progressivism at all costs. That
can be.
Progress cannot be dictated by people based on ideologies. Human beings are flawed and dangerous and humble and great all at the same time. So what we actually need to do is not have progress at all. We need to take things as slowly as possible so that we can evolve over time, but knowing very well there's no sort of future utopia that we want to reach. We just want to lessen conflict.
No, I would say we don't mind progress, but we hate this sort of weird progressivism that's all over the world at the moment.
It all depends on how you measure progress is the thing, So, I mean, on the one hand, yes, things are materially better now than they were 30 years ago, for instance. But on the other hand, you see previous existing social institutions, family structures, identity, religion, and all that sort of social fabric is fraying at the edge. And the thing that's kind of holding us together now is basically, the relative prosperity that we have, and the technological advances and stuff. So if you take all that away, or if there's a significant collapse, now the erstwhile decadence we enjoyed is gone, and the supporting structures that we used to have are now no longer there. So progress is not a binary yes or no thing in my mind. And if you look at history, I think that's kind of self-evident. I mean, like Steven Pinker, he's got this idea that, just in that sort of condescending way he talks, he's like, if you look at progress, I mean, we had the Enlightenment and things just progressively kept getting better and better. And then I'm like, oh yeah, and then we had the First World War and the Second World War and millions of people died, and then we have communism and stuff. I'm like, so it's not constant progress all the time. And if you look at sort of the situation we're in now, with some of the dangers involving the financial system, fractional reserve banking and stuff, and the inevitable, I think, kind of degeneration of the United States and sort of what that's going to mean geopolitically, coupled with a potential severe economic crisis. I mean, you can't exactly call that progress if you want to measure it, if you strictly want to measure it in terms of wealth and creature comforts. And then we'll resort to barbarism.
Well, I mean, my contention is that progress doesn't exist at all. It's a myth. It's a myth that humans have created.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
History goes in cycles. Progress is an illusion. So while we have technological progress and we may live longer or we are wealthier, it doesn't mean we're more satisfied. It doesn't mean we have more meaning, and it doesn't mean we're more happy. Suicide rates are higher than ever, for example. Yeah. And the things that we use to make our lives better, in quotation marks, can also destroy us. John Gray is a philosopher at the London School of Economics. He used to be there. He wrote a book called Straw Dogs, a brilliant anti-progress book. I suggest all of you read it.
It's freaking nihilistic, man.
He's a pessimist. He's a pessimist, and he says, the telegraph and the train and combustion allowed the Holocaust to happen. So it has all these other effects. We can go things, we can have electricity, we can travel faster, we can communicate, but it can also cause our own demise.
Correct. Correct.
And the more, and his contention is that the more we develop technology, the more we actually can become enslaved to it and can actually destroy us a lot more. He's not anti-technology, so to speak. Here's the warning, guys. What you create can consume you in the end. And he says progress is just an illusion, things that we create to give us meaning. And I think he's right.
Yeah.
I can live with that.
No, in terms of that, I would certainly agree. I mean, there's certain, like, if you want to call it technological progression, that is a thing. Things are more advanced now than they are 10 years ago. But aside from measuring anything other than that, I totally agree. I mean, progress it comes and goes in cycles, in terms of civilizational health and all that.
And even then, like progress in buildings and progress in things that we do today are not really good for us. So, I mean, if you look at the modern school, right, like a modern office, it's impossible to work in a modern office. It's bright. You need air conditioning. It's actually anti-human to stay in such a place, but we have to, because the consensus is that you need lots of light, lots of people around you, and no privacy, because then you can collaborate with everyone. And it's all bullshit. like it's all bullshit.
That whole thing about collaboration, I've never put that one.
This is that's why I work for myself.
This is my office, and I'm at home, and I work by myself, and I'm really grateful for that. But these sort of things are not conducive to humanity for me. Glass, steel, and concrete are some of the worst things we've ever created. Same with roads. it destroys cities. The sort of individualistic sense of worth, in that I need my own car and I can travel anywhere I go. That's cool in a way, but it destroys cities and communities all over the place. And you can see the cities that sprung before cars and cities that sprung after cars, how different they are. Before, in Geneva in 1500, there was about 200,000 people. You could travel from one end of the city to the other by foot in 30 minutes. And it was clean, and there was everything that you needed right there. And there were parks, there were old age homes next to schools. It was very well planned out for human existence. Now, I can't even walk on my road. I have to drive to get anywhere. How do you build a community around that?
Yeah. And even here, where I live, I mean, there's some suburbs over here, Old Woodstock or Observatory, and you can see these are pre-car roads. They're very small, very narrow, very skinny, and they've got an entirely different vibe. And yeah, you could think once upon a time this was probably a vibrant, happening place, and people knew each other and stuff, and maybe they still do in some places. But yeah, I feel you.
Roman.
Yes.
As an anarchist, do you believe in hierarchy?
Well, I don't believe in hierarchy. I think hierarchy exists. It's like saying, do I believe in this microphone in front of me?
Well, okay. Do you reject it?
No, of course not. That's silly. That's ridiculous. Okay. If a hierarchy didn't exist, then I would be, everyone on this chat and in the world would be like the master, the jack of all trades par excellence. So I wouldn't need an accountant. I wouldn't need someone to service my car. I wouldn't need someone to fix my roof. I wouldn't need someone to do my administration. I wouldn't need a doctor. I could do all of that myself if there was no such thing as hierarchy. But no, I believe in the hierarchy of competence. Well, not that I believe in it. It just exists, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, no, it's just a fact of life.
What's your view on liberalism?
So, I mean, I've flirted around with the ideas of it. I mean, I still believe fundamentally that more free speech is better than less. In a general sense, as a principle, I believe that more property rights are better than less property rights, and things like that. But have you guys read The Virtue of Nationalism by Yoram Hazony?
No.
Oh, all right. So he it's called The Virtue of Nationalism, right? And he takes great umbrage to Enlightenment ideals, what we will call liberalism now. And he talks about these philosophers like Locke, Rousseau, and who's the other one who spoke about Hobbes.
Voltaire.
Hobbes.
All these people didn't have children. And those that did have children sent them off back into the orphanage.
Yeah, like Rousseau.
And his contention...
Such a charming guy.
Yeah. And Hazony's contention is that these people created principles for human beings that are childless, communityless, and don't have any meaning whatsoever. It's for people of their own stature. It's not for ordinary persons. Ordinary persons care about themselves, their families, their communities, and all things like that. If you give everyone equal freedom of speech, it can cause many problems within a community. So what Hazony says, liberalism, it's basically an ideology premised on humans that don't really exist. Yeah. On the super rational analytical person, which doesn't exist, and he's completely right about that. And when I read that, I was like, oh shit, yeah, I've been wrong about liberalism for quite a while. So I think, as I said, in principle, I think it's better. Some ideas are very good, and I think South Africa needs more of those ideas. But as a ideology, it's fatally flawed.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing too. I think, and we've mentioned this on the show before, but some of the good ideas of liberalism, if you want to call them that, like, free markets and stuff, are not strictly speaking the domain of liberalism only. I mean, if you look at countries that have gotten rich in the 20th century, I mean, you go down the list: South Korea, Chile, Singapore, what do they all have in common? None of them were democracies or particularly liberal at all, but they worked. So yeah, so this idea that in order to have progress, you need liberalism, I think, is just falls on its face, And although I do see the value in it, like you're saying, in some of the aspects of liberalism, I think its presuppositions about what man is and what they're capable of is entirely off base.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. But if you look at the great economic miracles of the 20th century, they were all run by authoritarian regimes.
Correct. Correct.
There's never been, as far as I'm aware, and I may be wrong on this, I don't know of a country that was colonized and then not, or started off from a very low base as a democracy and succeeded as a democracy 50 years later.
Yeah.
Look at Singapore. China's the big one, right? I mean, South Korea, they had their own strongman over there. Singapore, Pinochet in Chile. Who else? I mean, Kigali, Rwanda right now has their strongman right now, and economically they're doing quite strong. So you sort of need a quite a strong authoritarianism to get things working, and then I think liberalism comes after that. But it can't be your initial starting point, or I haven't seen that in practice and being successful.
Well, let's get everything in place first, or through authority, and then we'll kind of we'll be nice and liberal afterwards, type of thing,
But Lee Kuan Yew, who was the prime minister of Singapore, someone once remarked to me that, I mean, he did all these great things, but he didn't trust his own people to run the country after he died.
No.
But if you read what he actually said, he said, well, people will vote for their religion, their culture, their beliefs, and they won't vote in favor of the general public of the state. And we must actually prevent them from sabotaging the state, in essence. But not for this, because the state is all great and powerful. It's because, as a utilitarian argument, more people are better off when the state, i.e. Singapore in this regard, is better off. So that was his remarks. And I mean, I'm not a fan of authoritarianism as such, as a general rule, because most of it is quite awful. But I think there are some, we have to regard such opinions with a bit more nuance than just saying that, he's wrong because he's authoritarian.
Correct.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, there's no solutions really. There's just trade-offs, I mean, there's.
Isn't that the essential? Isn't that the essential conservative fundamental principle? Trade-offs.
I guess, or it's an economic one. I mean, it's both. It's just reality. I mean, I can either go, to the burger store, or I could stay home and save my money. Either way, I'm having to make a trade-off, and it's the same in life, socially speaking, or with governance.
Scott, you seem very quiet.
There is something that did you I don't know if you did watch our last episode that we did about fascism, actually, that because talking about looking at things more sort of nuanced and stuff, we did quite a very interesting episode on fascism, because you were talking about authoritarianism and stuff, and I think you would have liked what was actually said in the show.
Well, what was your conclusion, or what was the debate about?
Well, we were just sort of discussing fascism and stuff, and the fact that fascism, everything that we've spoken about today, most fascists, I think, would actually agree with, actually.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, isn't fascism really imperialism based on culture or race in an essential sense? Because Hitler wasn't a nationalist, right? He was an imperialist. He took over other countries.
But
So
look,
you want
Dylan actually broke this
he
down
wasn't-
quite nicely. Carry on,
Well,
Dils.
the thing with Hitler though is he wasn't a fascist either. Is the thing. I mean the penultimate example is Mussolini in Italy, and he wasn't particularly more expansionist than other powers at the time. And
Right.
other governments in Austria, Spain, or Portugal, which had a form of it's known as clerical fascism or whatever, they weren't particularly expansionist either. They may have had empires, but that was just because they sort of inherited from the previous regimes. But yeah, Germany was certainly expansionist. The thing that we are talking about as it relates to this conversation, I think, which is relevant, is the relation it has to sort of the critiques that they have of the system and sort of their understanding of what man is, and their disagreements with liberal ideas, I guess. Because I find a lot of the critiques pertinent, but not the prescriptions, basically.
Oh, right. Oh, yes, of course. Okay, like a bit like Karl Marx as well, right?
Yeah.
Karl Marx's critique of capitalism is actually a very good one of the best, in fact. But his solutions are dog shit. But I mean, at least his critiques are worth at least looking at. So, what are the critiques that of from fascists rather that you maybe not agree with, but that you take into consideration?
Anti-egalitarianism, for one.
That's Scott's favorite. Yeah.
Yeah,
but,
that's
it's absolutely true. I mean, the recognition, and this is sort of where I guess dogpiling on liberalism, I guess, a little bit, but the whole angle,
pile it on,
the whole
like a Sunday roast.
A lot of their critiques about liberalism have to do with the rejection of materialism, for one thing. So, and people of a more scientific sort of outlook or a materialistic worldview will obviously disagree with this, but the acknowledgement that humanity and the history of humanity is not merely some materialistic outworking. So, like Marx's theory of history as this, dialectic materialism, as he calls it, it's complete horseshit in the fascist mind. Which, I think most people, regardless of their political outlook, would agree with. You can't just boil people down to, homo economicus, the economic man.
Economic units.
Yeah. And furthermore, the sort of acknowledgement of the sort of spiritual nature of human beings that, some people might disagree with this, but I think that humanity is fundamentally a religious creature, whether they are Christians, Muslims, or self-proclaimed atheists. They are referencing their system outside themselves. And inevitably, a lot of these systems and beliefs they have are sort of circular. And in that aspect, I think they're right as well. So things like that, mostly just sort of on the social angle. And a lot of their mystical concepts about the state and whatnot, obviously, I don't particularly buy, but things of that nature.
All right.
Yeah, definitely the religious part, yeah.
Yeah, but especially atheists. Like, I used to be an obnoxious atheist a decade or so ago. I mean, you read Richard Dawkins like when you're 21 and you think you know everything about the world, right? And then you have someone like Sam Harris, who's like the super hyper rationalist sort of guy. He writes a whole book about how science can determine moral values. And I admit I haven't read it. I haven't read it at all. And I just, Sam Harris just puts me to sleep. So that's why I don't read it. But his whole mindset is constructed on this materialistic world that somehow has meaning for human beings. And I haven't read his argument, and obviously I'm not going to say it's right or wrong, but I find it very difficult to believe that science can give us moral answers at all.
Yeah, I mean,
the difference between facts and truth Facts are what science is for. Truth is what something else is for, whether that may be religion or something else. But I don't think the two can be equated together.
Yeah, and I mean, with that, this sort of naive, sort of scientific outlook on things that, I mean, you can't prove the scientific method out with itself. You know what I'm saying? It's a logical system that, yeah, it can yield results and whatnot, but the reason you do it isn't itself scientific. It's sort of logic, and the logic is sort of this sort of amorphous thing. We know it exists, but I can't, show you materially, hey, here's logic. Look, it's sitting right here on the table. No, it's like numbers. It's the number 7 isn't a real thing, right? And yet it exists, because without it, we can't build bridges. We don't know, we can't prove that it's there, but it forms a function regardless. So
yeah,
and that's kind of where he's run up against.
So my question for Russell, if I may, Russell, as a Christian reactionary, what do you think of what sort of Christianity? And in South Africa, 70% of South Africans say that they are Christian. So I mean, who's welcome in your Christian theocracy, if you had one? Like all Christians, or any?
You're asking a Protestant to give you this answer now, Roman.
I'm not a Protestant.
Russell would tell you, me being a Catholic would be like, no one else. Catholics believe that no one else is Christian unless they're Catholic. But you're asking let the Protestant answer. Carry on, Russell.
Well, firstly, I'm not actually a Protestant. Actually not. But anyway, it's not about to say who is welcome. I mean, the thing is, first of all, I mean, the thing is, I don't, like I said earlier, I don't believe in a out-and-out theocracy, but I believe in a symphony of a theocratic people with natural law, with what is actually practical and pragmatic all at the same time. So you can still have the idea that a theocracy wouldn't be able to be a authoritarian theocracy. It just wouldn't work. But the idea that I'm trying to say is that the people themselves organize themselves in such a way that it's theocratic. It's not about who is welcome and who is not. The idea is that you want to get you want to gain greater consensus amongst particular groups and communities. All right, so you could probably only have the greater the theocracy, the more local you would have to be. You wouldn't be able to do theocracy on a very centrist big state level. It's just not going to work. Not anymore. That's not going to be able to happen. But in a community which is locally based, where you can get quick consensus, that is a strong society. Usually, always, it is actually fundamentally, it's what brings people together. And when you want to build a strong society, you want consensus. It's the most important thing. In a country like South Africa, it's almost with this universalist idea, we really struggle to get any type of consensus going, which makes us an incredibly a weak actual country. We can't actually get anything going. But
well,
like
hallelujah.
I said,
Otherwise would be Venezuela by now if they did get anything going. So
yeah. No, well,
he's talking. Russell's not talking about the state. He's talking about the community or the society, South Africa as a whole. The consensus. I mean, it's difficult to. We can't. South Africans. Yeah, it's difficult for us to reach consensus in South Africa because there's so many.
Why would you want consensus?
Well, we don't need it if we can actually devolve into our into localized communities.
But what's stopping you from doing that instead of seeking consensus?
Well, like I say, at the moment in South Africa, we've got an overbearing universalist view over everybody. So nobody is actually free. You've got an overbearing universalist worldview imposed on what is actually groups of people who don't actually believe in this universal brew. Because if you look at South Africa, the average man on the street doesn't actually believe in this liberal democracy that we've got. Doesn't fundamentally. I hold to that. They don't believe in it at the grassroots. And my idea would be, okay, fine. The smaller creating of, like what you said, creating of communities. We can all. I don't mind. For me personally, I mean, the thing is, you can have a community a couple of kilometers away, which is 99.99% Muslim. It's not really a problem for me. You understand what I'm saying? Where they feel that they can live out, they can determine their own future and their own live out their own ways, and I can do that the same. So it's not about a theocracy at the state level. I mean, that's outdated. We can't go back to the medieval days. It's just not going to happen. I don't think
or modern day Saudi Arabia.
No, you can't. It's just not going to happen. You'd be able to implement pockets of theocracy at a localized sort of level, but you wouldn't be able to do it on a big state level. It's all about trying to get the best way to get as many people working together. I actually, rather than enforcing, if people want to be theocratic, let them be theocratic, but at a local level, and not impose it on it. So you don't want an overbearing state imposing a theocratic view on everybody, but you want everybody being able to live out freely a theocratic view. So that can only be done at a very local level.
And those that don't want to are allowed to leave.
Are allowed to leave? What do you mean?
Say, for example, someone is born into this theocracy of yours, of this community, of this theocratic community, and they reach adulthood or maturity, and they say, you know what, this is not for me. I'd rather go with, to the hippie commune down there and do LSD and women.
Like I said,
they will be allowed to leave, right?
Oh, I mean, the thing is, that is where, like I say, in the theocratic community that I'm living in, that would be allowed. I can't speak.
So it'd be like the Amish, basically.
Yeah. Look, the theocratic community.
Leave if they'll take you.
Yeah.
Russell's going to start his own Puritans branch here in South Africa.
No, look, I mean, the thing is, I can't speak for anybody else. Like I said, but if the for me personally, that's that. But I can't speak for any other theocratic community. It's got to be at a community localized sort of level.
I think Roman. I think that if you were to start a theocratic community, and the rule was, if you decide you want to leave because you think it sucks or whatever, and like you say, you want to go to the hippie commune and go and do drugs and whatever it is, you should be allowed to, because the whole test of the community should be, if the community is so good, people would want to stay. You know what I mean? So why would you stop them from leaving? You understand? So the whole idea behind the community is that it's so good that people won't want to leave, kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
And usually what happens in these communities, generally speaking, one of the main reasons why people don't leave, even if they disagree with the theocratic side of things, Roman, is that they've got vested interests everywhere. They're connected into that community. It's not actually, even though they are essentially free to leave, it's very, very difficult because they are intertwined socially, through family, through marriage, through all sorts of things with it. So it's all intertwined with them. So even if they did actually believe that they could be free to leave, and they could actually be free to leave, even if they were not in agreement with everything, they'd probably still stay, simply because of the attachment and entanglements that they've got with that community.
Yeah, well, people like to live with the people that they're more comfortable with. I mean, this is
Yeah, well, it's not
perfect.
just about comfort. It's not just about comfort. It's also you grow. Human beings are relational as well, more than anything else. We've already covered that human beings are religious by nature, by nature, whether they, like what Dylan said earlier, but they're very much relational as well. Now you bring these two together like this, you're creating communities and societies that are like glue with each other. Then you still bring family bonds and all that sort of thing, and blood and affinity and all those sorts of things. You really bind a group together.
Yeah, that's very difficult to separate.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
And the other thing too is, this sort of goes back to my point I made earlier about, prescription. So different things will apply in different areas. So in a place which is very homogenous, right? So like a real nation state like Serbia, for instance, not a whole lot of people there other than the Serbs, and they think a certain way, or Georgia, is full of Georgians and they think a certain way, and there's a lot of homogeneity. Hungary, they could do something at maybe a higher level, have like a constitutional monarch or whatever, but the problem is in a country like South Africa, which is so balkanized, with so many different groups, so many different identities, so many different languages and stuff, we're in a situation where you kind of have to, find a way where we could all sort of peaceably live together while remaining prosperous and stuff. And so, I mean, it's a very different situation here, I think, than, somewhere like one of those aforementioned countries.
Absolutely.
And it's going to require different solutions.
But I think South Africa could be sort of the blueprint for future balkanization in the world. So you see this sort of national populism rising up in Europe and America, and a little bit of it in South America, and Australia just had a new conservative prime minister. But I think South Africa could be the blueprint for balkanization generally. So while not being a progressive or believing in progress, I think the technological progress we've done in terms of cryptocurrency, energy production, and the internet and 3D printing could actually make this process a whole lot easier, where you could actually you can create your community and have a sort of an abundance of resources at hand, because you can literally sort of make everything within probably the next 50 years or so or you could buy anything you want using cryptocurrency and trading over the internet and using 3D printing to create something more physical, of course. So in my mind, I think South Africa could be, as I said, the blueprint for the state losing its power and communities taking that power and using it for their own benefit, and hopefully trading with other communities.
Is this mostly because of the incompetence of our state, right? That communities
Absolutely. I mean, I travel this country quite widely because I go hunt and I got friends all over the place, and people are living in anarchy already, right? I mean, I go to the very rural areas and see friends over there, and they know that there is a police station, but it's there like as a figurehead more than something real. The police don't know what to do. The hospitals are, the public ones are torn apart. Like there's no state there whatsoever. So they just create their own little state. I think anything is. And they got wind pumps, and they got energy generation, and they got diesel, which they bring in themselves. Look, the state doesn't exist in those areas, and that's a fair chunk of the country.
Yeah, that's probably a good portion of the country. Actually, it's becoming more and more everywhere outside the metros. It's going to eventually get that way.
Well, yeah, the semigration idea is massive now. I mean, we have people at our George office. George is not really a small town or anything by any means, but many people from Joburg are immigrating to the smaller rural areas or semi-grating, and doing well for themselves. I mean, starting small towns, or not starting small towns, but taking these small towns where they've literally got no service delivery whatsoever. I mean, barely even running water, and basically doing it themselves because they're resilient and just gutful, basically.
Yeah,
Make the Dorpies great again.
And there's thousands of stories like this. In Harrismith, I know, I don't know, a good friend of mine knows a farmer there who practically gives the town water because they didn't pay the water for like years and were in arrears for millions of rands and they couldn't pay. And this guy said, fine, I'll do drilling anyway. Let me drill some boreholes. Let's connect it to the main water supply. And now the town has water again. And now he's a national hero, or national, whatever, local hero.
Folk hero.
Rather. Folk hero of the time. But and the actual municipal workers themselves came and gave an official opening ceremony to this new water system that they have, because they also very happy to have water, of course. So once you take away the political bullshit, I mean, South Africans get along really well because there's really nothing else out there other than themselves and their neighbors. And for the most part, South Africans generally like the same things and they generally believe the same things. They're normally sort of small conservative religious people, small c conservative religious people. And why wouldn't they work with each other? Because they do.
Is there? What do you think? What do you think the chances are of? And I guess it's a difficult one because our government is so incredibly incompetent and stuff. I mean, how is the government now going to actually stop these anarchies from forming? Do they even have a recourse to actually stop it from happening?
Well, I think it's happening before their eyes. I don't think. I mean, this is even a notion in the political sphere of anarchies forming. But as we know, they are socialists and they want control, and they'll try take your stuff without paying, and that's the fundamental rule. If you only know the ANC as bullies who want to take your stuff without paying you, that's what they are. And every policy, every idea that they have is basically based on that premise. So, I mean, you want to take away your property rights, sure. Yeah, you can't really form much because the government can come in and take you out. But how can you take cryptocurrencies away, or 3D printers, or the internet? The internet's privatized, well, at least in my neighborhood. A private company put down the fiber line.
Yeah.
The government can't come in and knock that out. I mean, they can, sure, but it's still someone else's property. They have to go through a lot of loops and a lot of things to do that. But I think they're just too incompetent to stop it at this rate, and thank God for that.
Yeah. What do you think is, Roman, if I can just ask you, what do you think is the progression? So let's say, for example, now you have these little small towns. Let's say, for argument's sake, we have 15 small towns in the Eastern Cape and the Free State, or whatever it is. Okay, these small towns that have formed these little communities, and they are now 100% self-sustaining. Will it sort of remain like that, or will that sort of start spreading towards across South Africa and stuff? How do we make, this is going to sound rough, but how do you go about making anarchy mainstream, I guess?
You don't make it mainstream through the idea of anarchy. You don't call it anarchy. You call it self-government. You call it governance. You call it whatever people call self-determination these days. But sooner or later, people realize the government can't actually give them what they want, and they'll have to do it themselves. And there's thousands of examples all over the place. It's not a question of having a propaganda campaign. It is just a question about people understanding that it's inevitable.
People need to understand what self-determination is and what it can actually be for them, and people need to get a revelation of what self-determination is.
Yeah, in some respect, and I think the welfare state is a big obstruction to that.
Correct.
I think social grants account 17 million people, They're not going to give that up, and I wouldn't give that up either if I was on a social grant with nothing else happening, right? But I mean, that more than anything keeps the state in power.
Yeah. I guess the only thing I'm a little worried about, and this is sort of my pessimistic side coming out, because I'm not like, doom and gloom sort of guy, but in a situation where that happens, you could have a few situations occur. So you could have either what you're talking about, where the power devolves naturally as things further and further degrade, or you have a situation happen where you have essentially a left-wing despotism arise explicitly, and it just makes life shit for everybody, sort of a Zimbabwe situation. Or the third alternative is the state gets competent and they get their house in order after, being in the dumps for a while, and then people cede control back to the state. And this actually happened in the United States in one particular situation. I know the city council or the city was bankrupt and they couldn't do shit. And then people were like, all right, well, I guess I'll fill my own potholes. I guess I'll, we'll set up light poles and stuff so people don't get mugged at night as much. And then as soon as the city government was able to get their act in order, they ceded that authority to them again, because it's easier to have them do it than for people to do it themselves. And I think this is kind of an inevitable thing. So I think the breakup scenario is kind of a stopgap until something more radical happens, where either things dramatically improve or things get much, much worse.
Yeah, I think a balkanization scenario, the breakup scenario, has like about a decade time frame. Because if there is no infrastructure, there's no investment, people won't make money, there's no incomes, from your work. So you can't maintain something without money. But maybe there'll be different types of money that we could use on the internet that would be just as valuable and easily transferable. But remember, I'm not trying to paint like a utopian picture here. Governance can take many things. It can take the form of contracts. It can take the form of gangsterism. It can take the form of vigilante justice. It can take the form of, trustees of a body corporate. All these things are forms of governance. I would prefer contracts because I think contracts are a good way to solve issues and to get along with everyone else.
It's non-violent.
Yeah, it's non-violent. But I mean, in other parts of South Africa, the Cape Flats, I mean, gangsterism is the order, is the governance, and it's just purely based on violence and
there all the time.
Territory. Yeah, absolutely. And it's based on violence and territory. That is a form of governance because there is nothing else to replace it. It has replaced the state to a large degree. And that is not the sort of balkanization that I would want to live under. And it's not the form of balkanization I want other people to live under. No, but it is a possibility. It is a possibility that it will exist in some ways as it exists today. So I'm not saying balkanization is, this utopian vision I have. There's a lot of risks associated with it. You just have to make sure that you're prepared to pick the one that is most beneficial to you. And for me, it's contracts.
Yeah. No, and I guess that sort of goes back to our last point. There is no end game. So contracts for now, and then totalitarianism, and then right-wing militia groups, and then structure and order, democracy. And then
constitutional monarchy.
And then constitutional monarchy, and then liberal infiltration, and then we get the ANC again, and it all repeats.
Let's watch repeat.
I mean, I'm signing the contract with my right hand, but my left hand has a pistol, and while the contract is in place, I'm going to stock up just in case on arms and things like that, because the contract can be broken, of course.
Yeah.
But that's what I do anyway in the democratic South Africa right now. I've got a pistol right next to me because that's the reality of living here. So it's not going to be anything new to me. I just think other people who are ill prepared are in for a big shock.
Yeah,
absolutely.
No, that's certainly for sure.
Anything else you wanted to talk about, Roman? I think we've been going for about an hour or so.
Not really. I got a sense of your view, which I found rather interesting. I'm not sure about the Christian aspect. For me, the entire world, as we know it now, is based on Christianity. It's the only religion that said humans are valuable and equal. Or maybe not equal, valuable,
in the
rather.
eyes of God, yes, yeah.
Yeah,
Equal in the eyes of God, yeah.
Exactly. And I think that has dominated the ideas of the world today. And I think that's a vitally important contribution to it. If that can be placed, if that can be localized in some way, I do see it. Whether I would live there, I'm not too sure. I prefer it to others, but I prefer a more secular community on my side. But just one last question. Just one last question then. So what do you think generally about, and if all three of you may answer, that'd be great, the rise of national populism in Europe and in the USA? Is it here to stay? Is it a force for good or not? What will the results be in 10 years?
I think it was good and probably inevitable, you know? Like what we were saying,
inevitable.
I mean, if you have a situation where you cede more and more authority to, like Brussels or in the United States' case, to the federal government, and they're changing your societies in ways that you don't like, and the cultural angle has gotten to a point where people are starting to flat out reject it, like with this whole the trans issue, that people are starting to, I think, weary of this kind of thing to a certain degree. And this is where, the free speech issue kind of becomes interesting, because on the one hand, legally they could say whatever they want, but on the other hand, they'll lose their jobs if people speak out too much about it. But what they can do is they can vote, and people are voting, and that's still secret. And I think, it's just kind of, I don't see this as some sort of inspired movement driven by, virtuous ideologues, some sort of vanguard or whatever. I just think this national populism is inevitably what happens when you flood previously homogenous countries with foreigners and they lose national sovereignty.
It's pretty much,
yeah. Yeah, I would just like to say that the only reason why it exists, the sort of what they've termed right-wing populism exists, is simply because of they've tried to force the issue too much onto people. You do that. I mean, you can't really, this is the problem with these bureaucrats, these politicians, these technocrats. They really think that everybody loves them and everyone is just going to go along with everything forever. They really think that they believe in their own virtue, and they are now forcing that on a population group that's saying, well, no, actually we don't agree. And the more that population group is saying, no, we don't agree, the bureaucrats are these self-righteous bureaucrats are saying, no, well, actually you have to, and it's so we add a bit of a clash of ideas and a clash of heads. But I think ultimately, if you look at history, I think I think there will be certain countries in Europe the right-wing populism will either result in a how can I put it? Not necessarily them ascending into power, not necessarily, but definitely a retraction temporarily, at least, until another day, an assault on the general population by bureaucrats and by social democrats and self-righteous social democrats, that is. So if you take the idea of, say, let's take a country like Hungary, for instance. It's pretty homogenous. They basically said, no, thank you very much, bye-bye. So they kind of like, it's been an easy, like there it's like pretty much a slam dunk. They're not going to accept everything. countries like the main power structures being Britain, France, and Germany, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. People have those countries have been flooded with immigrants, especially those countries, and it's going to be a little bit difficult. I can't tell you. I think the ones in Eastern Europe, it's going to be pretty straightforward. I think not to say that the right-wing populists are going to take power. I'm not saying that at all, but they're going to hold back the advance. But will be interesting. I can't say what's going to happen in the other Western European countries. I'm talking specifically about Europe. In America, I think I don't know. There, you've got the immigration issue there, which is changing the setup in America. So I can't. Those immigration is the kind of the joker in the pack. Mass immigration is the joker in the pack, which could scupper the whole holding back of this forced imposing of will on the people. That's what I've got to say.
Yeah, I think this ties in again with what we spoke about last week, Dylan, with Mussolini and the rise of Mussolini. With there's those few things that have to happen in order for some sort of nationalist movement, or in this case, nationalist populism to flare up, and that's something like lack of national identity, which is what happens when you flood the country with immigrants in this case, financial crisis or whatever it is, forcing the country to band together, and a lack
radical
of
socialists.
Well, yeah, and then you have bureaucrats and socialists and everything to contend with. So it's kind of like a kickback, like almost like a natural knee-jerk reaction of people in a groupthink situation to become populist, and I think that's just a natural thing to see. It's one of those progressions in the, gosh, for lack of a better description, in the circle of life, or that circle that just goes full circle. I think it's just normal, perfectly normal.
Yeah, well, on my side, I think, and I wouldn't have expected this 5 years ago, I think immigration is the key issue for the next 20, 30 years. Mm-hmm. I think people see that immigration violates their rights of freedom of association deeply, and it creates all sorts of moral hazards in their country. Not because other people are inferior, it's because there's a distinct clash of civilizations at the end of the day.
Well, because it's not optional most of the times. Most of the time,
exactly.
It's forced on.
It's forced on them. That's the problem.
By a large degree, I think legal immigration is quite welcomed by most Americans. I think it is. I think it's quite high.
It is. Yeah, it is.
And in Europe as well. But I think the sort of immigration from third world countries that is not skilled and that is not a refugee, but these are just economic migrants, and I can sympathize with those economic migrants. I think that creates a lot of conflict in the countries where they go to, and I think that is the defining characteristic of the next decade or two.
It's just pulling your hand away from a burning stove. It's a reaction. It's a knee-jerk reaction. That's all it is. It's a perfectly normal thing. It's like you say, Roman. They're having their right to the freedom of association abused by having these things forced on them, and that's all it is. I think it's perfectly normal. I think people populism gets given or national populism, like you see in Europe and stuff. A lot of people criticize it and stuff, and I think it's perfectly normal. I don't see anything sinister about it. I don't see anything racist or anything like that. I think it's just a perfectly normal knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's knee-jerk as such, but I think it's a people or a nation that is trying to keep things the way they are, and that's inherently conservative at the end of the day.
It's a very visceral human reaction, I think. It's
absolutely.
Yeah,
And the downside too, and people are beginning to recognize this, is when you import a lot of people into the country, it changes your society and maybe in a way that you don't like. I mean, just simply put. And some people will say, like a lot of left libertarian types, we should open borders is the way of the future, and we should totally embrace this, and because they're individuals, and unless they break the law, let them in. But I mean, if you think about it, like, are you aware of the Free State Project, Roman? Have you heard of that?
I have heard of it, yes, in New Hampshire, I think.
Yeah. So the idea with that, for anyone listening, is that they would get a bunch of libertarians to sign up to move to New Hampshire in such concentration that they'll be able to affect the society that they're moving to. And that's exactly what you're going to have happen with, a bunch of people flooding in from Guatemala or whatever. And they're going to bring their preconceived notions about how society should be, and their social pathologies and the rest of it, good and bad, but it's going to change, and it's going to be in a way that you're probably not going to like. It's just the way it is. And to not recognize that is, I think, the height of folly.
Hang on a second there, Dylan. So this is an actual thing that exists. It's a group.
Free State Project?
And it's a group of libertarians, you said, right?
Yeah.
that want to flood a state
New Hampshire
with libertarians.
Yeah.
It sounds like a fairy tale.
Look,
it sounds like standard issue libertarianism.
Look, and here's the thing, and on the one hand, they'll say, yeah, this is a great idea, and to a certain degree it is. I mean, if you want to change, if you want to live in a society that reflects your values, that's one way to do it. Get enough numbers there that you are able to have an effective and organized cadre to change society, and get rid of the gun laws and make things, liberalize things up in here. But at the same time, many of these people do not see the negative inverse of that, and you see it all over the place, even like in flyover states or Texas or Arizona. They'll complain about the people who lived in California, and then it got flooded with Mexicans, and then they didn't like it, and then so they moved to Arizona, and then they start voting for the shit that made California what it was in the first place. But
the reason
they resent that, so they're like, no, you just want to recreate what you did there here, and that's just bullshit.
It's like
the reason why I find that. Sorry, Russell, can I just interrupt there?
Yeah,
the reason why I find that so amusing, Dylan, is that I've heard libertarians argue for things like if you flood South Africa with 30 million, because I mean the way we see it is if you flood South Africa with 30 million Indians, South Africa becomes India, basically. Okay.
Correct.
But you have a group of libertarians that want to flood this state to make it a libertarian utopia, but they're the ones that argue against the idea that if you flood South Africa with 30 Indians, it becomes India. I find this incredibly amusing.
Yeah, it lacks. It's a total lack of second stage thinking. There's no implication into okay, so if this is the case, let's think of some other situations where this might apply in a negative way. What happens if you have 30 million people who vote the way that you don't want to vote and who have a higher propensity for crime? Are you going to like that? No, you're not. So, but that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, unfortunately, in my neighborhood, people have a higher propensity for smugness because it's full of white liberals. So I'm thinking of actually moving.
White liberals.
Yeah, they're the worst.
Don't move to Cape Town.
Look, yeah, don't move to places like things that are off limits for you in Cape Town are places like Nuatuk, Komaki, Hout Bay. Those are just stay away from there.
You,
Then, you
wouldn't
won't
survive there, Roman. You wouldn't survive there. Too much,
No, I
too
wouldn't.
much
No.
white liberalism going on over there.
lots of NPCs there as well.
And I was in Eastern Cape with my friend who owns a farm, and he's old Scottish blood, and all the neighbors and the farm workers and the general areas is a coloured area, and I've never felt more at home.
Yeah.
Where in the Eastern Cape were you, Roman?
And Uitenhage, close to Uitenhage.
You
It's
yeah.
okay.
After.
Yeah, that's how you say it. And I just felt so much more real, like a real sense of community. You could feel this community has been there for at least 100 years, and they have. The farm has been the family for 4 generations, and you can just feel the sense of community there. And yeah, to replicate that in the city is very, very, very difficult. But hopefully, with balkanization, we can try that.
And I'll
Right,
be a real
gentlemen.
trailblazer with my internet business. I'll lead the way.
Yeah.
right on out to the veldt.
Dylan will be writing Christian Reactionary's Bible.
I'll be the Unabomber. I'll be writing my manifesto with one hand and then like teaching Asian kids with the other. It'll be good.
All right, I think we're done, guys. Anything else?
I'm good.
This was awesome. Thanks so much,
Not from
Roman.
my side. Well, thank you for the invitation. Well, I mean, I forced myself upon you in a non-sexual way, and I'm glad that you enjoyed it.
Yeah. Roman's about ready to get me too'd by Scott.
Yeah.
I got the WhatsApps. It was all consensual.
Yeah.
I got receipts.
Yeah.
I got the contract.
Yeah, the contract.
The agreement.
Non-violent contract.
Non-violent contract.
Yeah, that's
Anyway,
what WhatsApp
thank
is.
you so much for listening, everyone. Go and check out Roman at the Renegade Report. What are you guys still? You and Jono still going on there, or what? Or is
Yeah, we're still going on, just not weekly, because I mean we've actually sort of reached a point after 3.5 years where we sort of run out of guests in a way. And,
yes, you guys have had almost all the oaks on, really?
Yeah, no, we've had everyone that you can think of for the most part, and we've had almost 200 episodes. So now we're thinking, okay, what's the next step? For the Renegade Report, and we're still deciding. We will see. We're not intending to close or anything like that, but maybe be not so tight on schedule, and let's just try get the, just good guests for good conversations, and that's taking a little bit more time than before, because I think the alternative media space has opened up so much in the past 3 years. There's like a new show every week, and it's fantastic. But I think people are getting rotated on the circuit, and then after a while, it's like gets a bit boring, perhaps.
Yeah, there is. I like the idea of a whole bunch of new sort of YouTube channels popping up. I know Germ's YouTube channels out there, and then obviously Tea with Helen, with Auntie Helen. That's also around there and stuff. So there's a lot of and of course Sietle's shows and stuff.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of
north-south Afrikaans one called Politiek, which is very good. There's just dozens. Conscious Caracol, Carl Blunder before he got taken down this week. But I mean, there's literally he did.
Was that real? Was that legit? Is he actually taken down?
He did.
Apparently so, yeah.
What, on off YouTube?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Serious.
Gone.
And it's a pity because one of his cohorts called Nochals, he's a colored fascist.
Yeah, he's a fascist as well.
He had a video about the history of coloreds in the Cape, and it was fascinating. I didn't know anything.
Loved that video.
It was such a good video.
Yeah, that was a brilliant video.
Yeah. So anyway,
as an honorary colored, I really appreciated it.
Yeah.
It was a great video.
Yeah, but anyway, I mean, the alternative media space is opening up, and hopefully we can take down the mainstream nonsense when they're not taking themselves down. We won't take bribes from Secret Service to pay for our BMW. I mean, that's just ridiculous, right?
Amateurs.
Oh,
that's the problem. That's the problem. Corruption in Africa is just such amateurish. You serve out your time in office, and then you get the kickbacks.
America perfected it, yeah. not during, after. It's all about time preference, man. Listen to an economist. Anyway, chaps, I need to run.
All
Yeah,
right. Thanks
cool.
so much,
Roman,
Roman.
thanks for coming on. I think we'll just can we just kick Roman off here quickly, and then or you can leave,
Cheers.
sign out, whatever. Cheers, Roman.
Cheers, gents. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Cheers,
Bye-bye.
bye. Cheers, bye. All right, guys, that was a fantastic episode with Roman. I think you guys enjoyed it.
It was fun.
Yeah. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for listening. Go and check out Roman on the Renegade Report. Thanks for listening, everyone. Remember to like, share, check out,
Subscribe.
Totally dank Twitter. Dylan's totally dank Twitter. And subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for listening, guys. Stay reactionary out there. Yours.
God wills it.